Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Drew Hendry. Well, our guests in the programme this week, we're delighted to be joined by Hugh Marshall from Talking Wales. Good afternoon, Hugh.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good to see you again. And we're also delighted to welcome Dr. Alan Flower, a retired nuclear physicist and an expert on Ukraine and Belarus. Good afternoon, Alan. It's good to have you on the programme.
Yes, good afternoon from a rather dreich Edinburgh.
Drake in a lot of places, I think, today. But we'll start today with the Ukraine update. It's day 1229. Russian air defences shot down 4 Ukrainian drones headed for Moscow on Saturday, Sergei Sobyanin, the city's mayor, said, while one of the capital's main airports temporarily halted outgoing flights. Sobyanin said emergency services were working at the sites of the downed drones, but gave no information on potential damage. Officials at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport reported delays in departures after flights were temporarily paused. Russia's Civil Aviation Authority, Rosaviatsia, said the measures were taken in response to restrictions over the capital's airspace, as well as strong winds. Rosaviatsia said incoming and outgoing flights at airports in several other Russian cities were also temporarily halted, including St. Petersburg's Pulkovo, citing safety concerns. Russia's defense ministry said that air defense units had destroyed 48 Ukrainian drones over a 5-hour period on Saturday evening. Those included 5 drones in the region surrounding Moscow, 2 of which were headed for the capital. The ministry said the total included 17 drones over the Bryansk region on the Ukrainian border and 11 on the adjacent Oriol region. The governor of Belgorod region on the border said 4 Ukrainian drones had injured a bus driver and a man driving a car. An earlier defense ministry report said 94 drones had been destroyed over Russia overnight on Saturday and 45 more in just under 6 hours during the day. Ukraine's special forces struck Russia's Boris-Oglabesk military airport in the Voronezh region on Saturday, hitting a glide bomb store and a trainer aircraft. In a statement on social media, the Ukrainian military said other aircraft were also likely hit in the southwestern Russian region, without giving details. This airfield is the home base of the enemy Su-34, Su-35S, and Su-30SM aircraft, the statement said. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth unilaterally halted an agreed shipment of military aid to Ukraine due to baseless concerns that US stockpiles of weapons have run too low. It's been reported. A batch of air defense missiles and other precision munitions were due to be sent to Ukraine under a promise made during Joe Biden's administration last year, but the Pentagon halted the shipment, reportedly a decision made solely by Hegseth. However, Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell seemed to confirm that there is no current shortage of arms for US forces. He said, "Let it be known that our military has everything that it needs to conduct any mission, anywhere, anytime, all around the world." Ukraine's top military commander, Alexander Syrsky, has warned of a possible new Russian offensive in the northeastern Kharkiv region. "I dedicated 2 days to working with units in the Kharkiv region," Syrsky said. He added that he spent time talking to commanders, studying the situation in the area and the needs of troops there. He said that the Russians are looking to press with numbers, but have to be ready to use appropriate tactical and technological solutions and prevent Russia from moving forward. Russian forces have already pushed into northern Ukraine's Sumy region over the past months, carving out a small foothold there. Meanwhile, Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko released 16 prisoners on the 3rd of July to mark Belarus Independence Day. This follows an earlier release of leading Belarus opposition figure Serhiy Tsikhanouski after more than 5 years in prison, raising questions about whether Lukashenko is trying to ease his isolation from the West, even ahead of the forthcoming Russia-Belarus defense exercises. There's a lot that's been happening in the Ukraine region without, it seems, any any real effort to unblock the situation there. Can I ask you, what do you think needs to be done there in order to have a breakthrough towards a ceasefire?
If I can maybe come in on this, because I'm very immediately involved as somebody who for
Yes.
30 plus years has been engaged in both Belarus and 20 plus more in Ukraine. There is a very difficult situation for the people of Ukraine. And if I was to get one message across to our Broadcasting Scotland audience, there is that the situation that Scotland so rallied to back in 2022 when the war started, we very much have a repeat of that, the stress of the civilian population. We're hearing in the news, although it tends to slip out from time to time, but pleased to see Broadcasting Scotland does this Ukraine update to remind us that the civilian populations of the main cities are under huge stress. And what this means is people who returned to Ukraine. I'm dealing with a mother with a 13-year-old child who spent a year in Germany, went back because she's a psychiatrist and felt that the trauma victims there, she could actually do a very useful service to her people in Kiev. But she spent most of the last 2 months since the beginning of May in a damp basement in not very pleasant conditions, and now she has a bronchial condition. So she's basically decided to reach out to the UK and said, "Can I join Homes for Ukraine?" So a message about all those people who assisted before. We do need to re-establish. So the one takeaway is, for me, there's lots more we could discuss about the whole situation. And Mr. Putin, who finally, hopefully, Mr. Trump has realised this man does not want peace. It's in his interest to keep the war going, just as we've got with Mr. Netanyahu. We'll come to that later. But let's think of the civilian population sitting in these damp basements in the metro as well. That started to get filled up because the people who were a bit casual about making a decision, there was very little risk of their of damage and some issues. The massive onslaught. I mean, I think we had a record just the other night, over 500 rockets or drones on Kiev. This business that we're reaching new records by the day is causing a real impact. So Europe's going to have to get ready. There is already in progress another wave, which I'm personally dealing with by the day. So it's something very close to me. And as for Belarus, only one takeaway there: the conveyor belt, the revolving door of political prisoners out and more captured. The leader of a very eminent Belarusian rock band, Palas, was arrested just somewhere in the last week to 2 weeks. There's virtually as many going back in. We don't hear about the arrests so much as we hear about the releases, because Mr. Lukashenko's publicity machine is all about, exactly as you've reported in your brief, exactly about trying to soften up and look good to the West. He wants to sell potash to America, so he's gonna go sweet with America for a while. Okay, that's my take.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Allen. Let's turn now to the Middle East and our update from there. At least 57,338 Palestinians have been killed and 135,957 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. The death toll in Gaza is rising at a rate of almost 1,000, but there's still no real effort to implement a ceasefire. While doctors in Gaza warn of babies at risk of death from lack of formula, and the United Nations' Francesca Albanese has called on states to cut trade ties with Israel over its what's called genocidal campaign in Gaza. Coming to you, Hugh, what does the death and casualty figures tell us about the situation that's unfolding on the ground in Gaza just now?
It seems to be getting worse again. Following the initial bombardment and destruction of large parts of Gaza, I think the situation has deteriorated. Obviously, there's an issue with getting aid into people. the fact that people are dying, collecting aid, and the sort of IDF and the American security people, who basically mercenaries, appear to be have some responsibility in that. It's really difficult. Obviously, sort of Netanyahu's visiting the White House, so there'll obviously be some sort of PR exercise going on there. But yeah, I don't know. It depends how Trump is feeling, whether he's going to be nice or nasty to him. So yeah, it's just really, really depressing that I remember back in the day, showing my age, when the United Nations used to have clout in these kind of situations, and it seems to be now that from a world order point of view, rogue states like Israel, Iran, Russia can just do whatever they want.
And do you think there's any realistic chance of any accountability being held for the actions that have unfolded in the ground in Gaza?
No, because obviously, when it comes to any of these things, then the United States just tends to veto any action that might take place. Obviously, Netanyahu, is in his interest to keep the war going for as long as possible, because he's facing corruption charges, and it's incredible. It does appear that he's basically keeping this going in order to save his own skin. 50,000 people have died. The families of the hostages, they're clearly unhappy because Netanyahu isn't sort of stepping up to the plate to secure their release. Hopefully, we'll get the ceasefire, and I believe that 10 surviving hostages are part of that deal. But we need a long-term solution. And unfortunately, whilst you've got Netanyahu on one side and Hamas on the other, it's not going to happen. You need two regime changes, and there's a lot of work there to be done to build trust and respect, because you can imagine, if you're a Palestinian, you're not going to trust or respect the Israelis for quite some time.
And Dr. Allen, what does the intensity of operations on the ground in Gaza tell us about the future for the people that have been living there and have been displaced?
Well, I mean, my comment would be absolutely in line with you. Everything he said, I fully agree with and concur with. This desire to essentially clear Gaza, and some of the earlier utterances of Mr. Trump as to what the future of Gaza might be, just bear no consideration. What, of course, concerns me is when a people essentially voice an opinion and lose control of their country, and that democracy and the will of the people is shown to be so wanting in so many places, is a very root fundamental issue, including in Gaza. These people don't deserve what they've ended up getting, and for that matter, a significant number, possibly a majority of the Israeli people, may well consider they've had enough and would wish change. And we see that certainly in Belarus, where you had a Belarusian people stuck with a leader not following the will of the people. What to do about it? We need some. There was a time when, yes, as Hugh pointed out, UN could have some clout, but then again, even then, we could only put in UN peacekeeping forces if there was a peace to keep. And if you've got a Netanyahu who, a bit like Putin, is hell bent on maintaining a war, and he's being given the fuel, unless you turn the tap off, and that's really where, in my view, the solution is. Trump seems feared to turn the tap off Netanyahu. There's Jewish vote is massive politics in America, and the West, for various reasons, has taken far too long to turn Putin's tap off. So I see a very similar thing that is giving the issue of allowing this and ramping up on the very undeserving Palestinian people who deserve the right to their homeland and deserve the right for a machinery to give them a government who is acting in the interests of the people of Gaza. And until we get that somehow, and we are suggesting a solution, wake up, Mr. Trump, and I hope he's getting a wake-up call with Putin. And we don't, I know, we'd all like to be a fly on the wall as to what the conversation is, because fundamentally, let's all hope the peacemaker, that urge for the Nobel Peace Prize by Mr. Trump, will be what will trump literally over his issues with the Jewish vote. And I think he may well be misjudging that. I don't think so many well-meaning Jewish people can be that happy with what they're seeing happening around this new American, as you put quite rightly, these sort of inspired, rather footloose Americans that have appeared in Gaza. So there's only hope that some of the people will get back control, and so much unfortunately focuses on the mood, as Hugh has quite rightly said. It's all down to what comes out the next few days with Mr. Trump and Netanyahu.
Well, this obviously, this action in Gaza and elsewhere has sparked protests and civil events, and which brings us to domestic matter just now and the issue over the right to protest. Let me ask you, what should be the legal bar for a government to prescribe a protest group as a terrorist organization? As Lukashenko marks Belarus Independence Day with the release of political prisoners he arrested during the 2020 protests, the UK is arresting demonstrators for protesting against the war in Gaza. So how can citizens defend the rights to protest? I'll start with you, Hugh, and then come back to Dr. Allen.
Get a better government at Westminster. It's ridiculous. I think one of the problems we have is Keir Starmer is his desperate desire to appear strong and statesmanlike, when in fact people see him as, a civil servant, as somebody, who can organise things as opposed to lead. And I think that's what it comes down to fundamentals. Also, the fact that they're pandering to the to the reform elements in society. It's crazy to think that we have to be careful with our words as we speak now, in case we fall foul of the law. We saw yesterday an 83-year-old, I think a vicar from the Church of England, being arrested for holding up a placard supporting one of the prescribed organisations. And I think it was difficult as well. I know the SNP and Plaid Cymru have come in for criticism, but the issue they had, as far as I can see, or definitely from Plaid Cymru, was the fact that they lumped in one organisation with another two. It's mad to think that people who breach security, which is crazy that somebody could actually break into an Air Force base where planes, active planes, are located, and be able to put paint on them. Apparently those planes have flown 2 or 3 times since. So from a damage point of view, yes, I don't condone people damaging things, but in Wales we have Cymdeithas y Iaith Cymraeg, the Welsh Language Society, who did take direct action, who did take down road signs, who did paint over road signs, and without their actions back in the late 50s, early 60s, then the Welsh language would be in a dire state now. So I think again, another cause for independence, so we can actually make our own laws and not have laws foisted on us. So I don't know, from a legal point of view, obviously Scotland having a separate legal system, whether things would be different there. But from Wales, it's the laws of Wales and England. So we get what they decide.
And Dr. Allen, what is the line between peaceful protest, public protest, and safeguarding the safety of of people? What is the line that should be there?
Well, that's a question I find very easy to answer, because in 2020 I was coordinating and organizing the protests on behalf of the Belarusian diaspora, drawing attention to the fact there had been a stolen election and the Belarusian people did not want. In August the 9th, 2020 was the election date, and I had to go through the process of uh, organizing static demonstrations, learning all about the process of how you organized also peaceful marches you do have to report. And I'm now very close in touch with the police liaison people. And if you work well and you keep within the limits of the law, and what is the law? Well, you don't obstruct, you don't basically cross lines that would violate normal public order laws. You don't destroy other people's property, and that's where there's a thin line. How do you get a bit of publicity and attention? And I'm very sympathetic to use point about how do the Welsh nationalists get a bit of attention? But there's various ways to do it, and whereas I fully agree with everything Hugh has said, I do have to take issue with the introduction to this, stating the UK is arresting demonstrators protesting against the war in Gaza. I think we have to put a rider to that. They're arresting demonstrators who are protesting against the war in Gaza and in support of an organization that not just the red paint over the planes, but I understand they invaded, and there was damage in a factory in Glasgow about a year or two. The Palestinian Action (PA) is a group that declares they are inherently a direct action group, and their track record is not just, if one looks at the various reports of what they have proudly reported as doing since at least 2021. I think they were founded in 2020. I'm afraid to say there's been a bit too much criminal damage in other areas. Okay, paint on aeroplanes, that may have been the last straw, but I think we have to look at the history there. Now, there are plenty of good there's the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. So next time I'm in Westminster and I want to support the Palestinian people, I'll just hold up a placard saying support Palestinian solidarity. There's also medical aid. There's plenty of non-prescribed, legal, pro-Palestinian human rights, pro-Palestinian aid organizations. So in my position, I will align with the organizations that just don't overstep and break normal reasonable laws of the United Kingdom. So in answer to you, where's the threshold? Just keep on the right side. Well, by the way, I went on my protests both in Edinburgh and in London. I have found that if you do that, you cannot get more support from the police forces, who very much see as their role. I've personally experienced the right to protest really is that sacred, and they will do everything they can, advise, assist you, what's your route, get your route of your march right. And in the case of Belarusians, we had a few Russian pro-Putin people who didn't really like the protests against Lukashenko, and they made sure that we were well protected. So I think we're going to see another side of this. The authorities do very much work to protect protesters, and there is no reason why anybody in the UK, let's not mix up the different pro-Palestinian human rights organizations. Nobody's saying it's illegal to protest and support the Palestinian people. Absolutely not the case. Perfectly legal to get out there. You can wave a Palestinian flag, support human rights organizations, medical aid organizations, and let's do it. I'm sure everybody listening has huge sympathy for the Palestinian people and huge irritation over the fact that maybe Britain could do more, but we can all view the debates in Westminster and draw our own conclusions as to what's said in the House of Commons.
Well, let's turn to something you can't avoid in a current affairs discussion. That's President Trump. From there, this week, President Trump's self-styled "big beautiful bill" passed Congress. As the same time, children were dying in floods in Texas. What will this bill mean for ordinary Americans, for the United States economy, and for global economies, Hugh?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting because obviously because I couldn't believe it that it is actually called the Big Beautiful Bill. That I thought it was like some sort of nickname, but that's what they called it. But it's lots of legislation rolled into one sort of piece of legislation that allows technically Trump to do lots of things, although it's not quite as clear cut as that, as he has to sort of, some of those things he will need to get support to get them actually enacted. But, from what I've read from the commentary, it does appear, as has always been thus with the Republicans, that it's going to make rich people richer and poor people poorer. The scary thing was the fact that ICE, according to the figures that I sort of read, will now have more of a budget than the FBI, CIA, and all other sort of organisations put together. But whether Trump can actually access that money is another matter. But there's an element of authoritarianism in there, but also, sort of, the poor people who, believed Trump would make America great again. It's making American billionaires richer and poor people poorer. And I feel sorry for those people that were taken in by him.
And do you feel the optics of the floods in Texas just now, obviously with the implications of advancing climate change, provide a background that's going to stimulate further political debate in the US here?
Yeah, definitely. So one of my past jobs, I was actually in charge of the S4C's weather service. So I'm what is an area that I have sort of quite so extensive knowledge in. So the fact that the central funding for weather forecasting in the United States has been withdrawn, you had people in America saying, well, that we don't need the national one because we get our weather bulletins on local TV, not realizing that all that data comes from a higher source. So it is, again, it's just short-sightedness. The fact that the MAGA movement and Trump, don't believe that climate change is an issue or man-made, that it's a man-made issue. Drill, baby, drill. And if you're getting what's happening in Texas, it's terribly sad to read about sort of those young children. Because when I saw the footage of the floods actually starting, it was incredible. You had a riverbed that was virtually dry, and within 30 seconds, it was a raging torrent, and it just shows we're having more of these extreme weather sort of happenings. We're having them in the UK. We're all familiar with areas within our own localities where there's been flash flooding and it's caused damage, and in some cases taken lives. And the world is on. We are on a stopwatch, and we're dangerously coming to the end of that ticking time coming to an end. And it does concern me that the fact that green energy in the US, that they're looking to penalize it rather than grow it. But it's interesting. You look at China. China are so far ahead now from green technologies. They're the biggest exporters of green technologies. And it dwarfs what the United States are exporting when it comes to, sort of fossil fuel energies. So, this idea that China is this world polluter, they are putting their house in order, and they're also benefiting from it economically because they see what the future lies. But, with Trump, it's oil interests. With Farage, it's oil interests. So, it's depressing, and the fact that people don't believe that the climate has anything to do with it. It's just weather. There was a farmer on Radio 4 this week, and he was saying about, how last year it was all floods. This year it was all, hot weather, so the crops haven't grown as much. And, but he was saying that, people saying that it's, climate change, it's just weather. Well, I would ask him, to ask his father and grandfather who were farmers, whether, things were this bad when they were sort of farming. It wasn't. It is a recent phenomena. And the fact that there seems to be a section of society that are just blinkered to it, who don't want to believe it, is frightening.
And Dr. Allen, what do you think are the economic implications of this bill for not only for US citizens, but for globally and for people here?
Yeah, well, I'm largely going to defer to you on this because I have to admit my focus has been somewhere on Eastern Europe while all this is going on. But I mean, where have we been since February with Trump's fast and loose
Yes.
play with global economics? I mean, tariffs going up and down, horrendous period of instability, and as if we haven't got enough problem with the weather and the climate change issue, we basically just don't need this on top of it. So more trouble. But I think this one, really with your introduction referencing the issue of the floods in Texas. I don't know. We've probably all heard in the news today that Texas has put out a call for federal aid. I'm not sure if the response has yet been come out from the White House, but given Mr. Trump's very loud "America first," my one takeaway from all this is, well, let's see how Trump acts when he's got this situation in his own backyard, and this time it's with water and the heavy rains. We know how he acted and the bluster that we got over the forest fires, which I have to say there was a little bit of an issue with, because anybody who compares the way California manages their forests with the way Scotland manages their forests, fire breaks, fire prevention, all these sort of things, there clearly were issues which he brought out, but at the end of the day, American people were suffering, and clearly it's going to be, let's see if Mr. Trump can, with all these Netanyahu stuff going on over this weekend and on Monday, let's just see how much the White House gives to that attention. And we certainly know when America's economy catches a cold, we all do. So very unstable, and we're sitting here as pundits, but I think the one thing you and I can agree, you can't predict Mr. Trump which way he's going to go.
And Hugh, just one final thing on this. Do you think that this big, beautiful bill that Trump has put through and the implications within it, do you think that's going to spark some copycat policies economically amongst the other global economies?
I'm not too sure about that, because obviously it's very much geared towards, sort of giving tax breaks to wealthier people, and impacting on poorer people. So clearly what's happening, the economy in the United States at the moment is doing sort of relatively well, considering what's been going on, but it still hasn't, the effects of tariffs and Trump's sort of eagerness, because I think he came out telling Apple that they would have to make their Apple technology in the United States and not in India, because they thought they could circumnavigate and he was going to say, well, they're going to get 25% tariffs. So the fact that he's trying to dictate to big companies how they operate, it never ends well when that happens. And you look at Trump's business record, he's one of the very few people to have lost money running a casino.
Well, let's turn to Westminster once more. 1 year ago, Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister on the slogan "Change." So what changes have there been in the past year, and how has the new Labour government performed? Dr. Allen, coming to you first, what do you feel are Labour's big achievements over the past year?
Oh, I'll give you one word: Ukraine. And I'm sorry to go into my personal interests, but and I was thinking through this here just before the broadcast. Now, Keir Starmer is no Winston Churchill, and let's be clear in what I'm about to say. There is no way I'm trying to compare his status currently on the economic stage, but there is one very clear similarity. Churchill punched very well and high on the international stage, but in terms of our own domestic politics, social welfare, he had every right to lose the 1945 general election. Eye off the ball. And I'm rather feeling that's where Mr. Starmer is. Now, we've had horrendous international and world politics, tough to deal with in his year since he has been in there, but I'd give his scorecard on international affairs a pretty high mark, and there's been a number of occasions watching closely what Britain is doing on the international stage. Particularly, somebody's really basically had to take over from America on the lead on Ukraine, and that has been the UK. And Mr. Starmer is a sort of international technocrat who is pretty good and gets respect in Europe for the way he works. He's good with his brief, as you'd expect, of an experienced barrister lawyer. So a very safe pair of hands on the international stage, I would put him. But I think I may better defer more to Hugh because all of us have seen the ups and downs over the whole issue with welfare funding. I mean, my wife is on PIP, so yeah, we've been watching what is going to go on there. She had to go through the reassessment under the Tories. We're sitting thinking, oh my goodness, here we go again. Don't tell me we're getting yet another hit from a government that, if there was any change, it should be a change for the better on the social and welfare side. And on a final thing, at least we've got to be glad of one thing. When it comes to our glorious NHS, I've recently relocated from London, so I know all about the difference between an NHS England that the Westminster government tries to manage, shall we say, and up here in Scotland. And I am so glad to be in Edinburgh under the Scottish, I'd like to say that again, the Scottish Health Service up here, which I'm pleased to say has been driven by somewhat more sensible policies for care, welfare, social care, and the lot. And as somebody with a disabled, we're both over 70 wife with a lot of health issues, we are just so glad to be getting that service. So I think Labour has got a lot to sort out in terms of the internal domestic politics, and I'll defer to Hugh on the more detailed comments on that. I've said
Well,
my bit on the international stage.
Well, coming to you, obviously, Dr. Allen's praised Sir Keir Starmer's performance over the international situation regarding Ukraine. Do you agree that's been a high point for him? And what do you think? Are there other achievements you would point to?
Yeah, I think I agree completely. I think him, Macron, Trudeau, and then Carney, they seem to have, led the way. But definitely, Starmer needs to be given credit for being sort of the ringleader of that. And fortunately or unfortunately, he does have a good rapport with Donald Trump. I'm sure his opinion of Trump would be different behind closed doors, but under the current situation, he's done well to make use of that relationship. But generally, there was, I think it was Sky who created, they did a poll or created one of those word clouds asking people to describe the first 12 months of Labour in government, and the word that came up most was disaster. LBC ran a poll. They found that 30% of people who voted Labour at the last election regretted doing so. And remember, Corbyn in his first effort actually polled bigger numbers than Starmer, we have to remember that although Starmer has a huge majority, that was handed to him by Farage and Reform standing in all those seats and splitting the right wing vote. So I think his authority has always been on thin ice. His polling popularity is at a very low ebb, and unfortunately I think he's a poor communicator. He's incredibly dull. I think he would make a very good diplomat, as you were saying earlier, on the world stage, because he obviously across detail, but the fact that things like the thinking that they're going to be able to sort of save money by taking money off pensioners and then people with disabilities, it just beggars belief, and the Labour Party have moved so far away from their sort of roots. When you think about, because obviously, the NHS founded, based on what was going on in Wales with, sort of miners and unions coming together to fund services. But they've just lost their way, and I think again, in Westminster, it's not just the Westminster bubble; it's actually a smaller bubble where advisors, focus groups, sort of Starmer appears to be more concerned what people are saying on Mumsnet as opposed to what people are saying out in the country. And just finishing off with the NHS, there has been some sort of success in England with bringing down sort of waiting times, but in Wales we have I think it's the worst performing health service in the United Kingdom, and it's been run by Labour for 25 years.
And just on those, performances, what do you think what the electorate were looking for when they voted for Labour? What were the key tests that they set out, and how do you think the Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party have performed against those tests?
People wanted change, but they wanted change for the better. They wanted their lives to be better. They wanted, to be able to afford things and not struggle and worry about money. They want to have warm, safe homes. The trouble, I think, is when you actually look back, what did Starmer run on? All he ran on was he's putting the Labour Party back into the service of working people, and that's something I think annoys a lot of people. Not everybody is a working person, so he immediately sort of cuts out a lot of people with his focus on working people, which is a weird one. But also the fact that his father was a toolmaker and his mother was a nurse. He just had these sort of short messages, and it was obviously safe pair of hands. But as we saw with the result, it wasn't the overwhelming landslide from a vote perspective. It was gifted to him. So he didn't come in on a high. He came in on a high of MPs, but not on a high of public support. But the fact that he campaigned on change, and I think after 12 months, people were expecting things to change and change for the better. But I think the reality for most people are that their lives haven't improved. There hasn't been change. But 12 months, we'll see at the end of the end of the term of their government. But from a Welsh perspective, it's not looking good for Labour when it comes to the Senate elections next May, and I'd imagine the same is going to be the case in Scotland. They're sinking fast here, and people are equating the fact that Welsh Labour Party haven't performed well on the NHS and on education, the two main areas that they've got responsibility for. But they're also seeing that having a Labour government in Westminster that was supposed to sort of make things better in Wales, we saw with the 500 million for rail over 10 years in Wales, when I think Leeds is having 2.5 billion spent on it. So I think people are aware of, the fact that Wales isn't being given as good a deal by Labour at Westminster as it should be. And, the tensions are showing between the Labour Senedd group and members and the Westminster group. They really don't get on, and they're ideologically very different sort of perspective on things. So yeah,
Well,
I think
yeah, just picking up on
yeah. Sorry.
those tensions that you referred to just now. I, obviously, I think it's fair to say that there's been a fair amount of manoeuvring that's had to be done. How would you rate the crisis management that's been carried out in terms of how they've dealt with those issues that have needed to allow them to proceed with votes without losing the majority in the Commons?
It's awful, isn't it? Because when you think about it, they have this huge majority, and basically he's been hamstrung now because there was a huge thing around, before the election about the selection of candidates, and there were so many of them were handpicked. We had it in Wales where we had people like Torsten Bell parachuted into Swansea, sort of who was with the Resolution Foundation and has sort of seemingly changed his tune from what he was saying as the director of that, and now that he's a Labour MP. But yeah, the fact that a group of virtually new sort of MPs in the last 12 months came together and flexed their muscles. So he's a sitting duck because they know now that if he says something, all they've got to do is kick up a fuss because they're a big number of individuals. And I think in the past, you had those people like Diane Abbott and people like Corbyn who were in a sort of a minority who would kick up a fuss and they could quell that. They've now got a big chunk of Labour MPs who have seen they have power over Starmer. But also those MPs are obviously far more in touch with their the residents, their constituents, than Starmer is with the rest of the UK. So yeah, I think it is going to be difficult for them. I think their big problem was this. Reeves, I'm going to be tough. The Iron Chancellor. I work for the Bank of England. I'm not going to break our fiscal rules. Where the reality is that's stupid. You're just basically putting yourself in handcuffs right at the very start. Because come October, November, whenever the next budget is set, there's going to have to be tax rises. And if they did that, if they taxed, big corporations and wealthy people, there would be huge amounts of support for that. So I don't understand why they're pussyfooting around. They've got an opportunity to actually make themselves popular by raising taxes, but making sure they raise taxes from the right people.
Well, let's move on to something a little different now. The International Monetary Fund has published its latest report into the economy of Denmark, which stated that strong growth has continued, public finances and external positions are robust, and that the financial system has demonstrated resilience to multiple shocks in recent years. Contrast that with a new British Chamber of Commerce report, which warns that Scotland's economic growth is being held back by decisions taken in Westminster. Coming to you, Dr. Allen, and it was suggested that there would be stronger ties with the EU built over the past year. Denmark is a member of the single market. What do you think are the key lessons we can learn from both these reports that we've referenced just now?
Well, this is one I certainly am happy to speak on because as a young man in Scotland, Denmark, right across the North Sea, was a place I visited often, going right back to the 1970s, and became very familiar and aware of an economy in a little country about the size of Scotland that seemed to be doing quite nicely, thank you. And being in Edinburgh, and as a student at that time in the 70s, I came under the spell of a wonderful Scotsman called Professor Sir Neil McCormack, who was a European member of the European Parliament, an SNP member of the European Parliament in the early noughties. Very eminent Scottish lawyer and on the stage of international affairs. And I remember sitting in a talk by him on the ability of Scotland to stand on its own 2 feet. I must admit, it was around about 1974, 75 when we were having the first flush of excitement of the oil economy. And things have changed, but they've changed for Norway, they've changed for Denmark, they've changed for Scotland. So we are in a new reality of different oil economics. Yes, I still believe, and I think there's been plenty of reports as to how Scotland can stand on its economic own 2 feet, but with a number of riders. And it's complex, and it's clear that a lot of policy decisions have to be sorted out, that we can't end up having two potentially conflicting approaches to a separatist independent, what the form an independent Scotland would take. For example, with 60% of our trade approximately going to England, we really do need to think about the whole issue of what sort of a trade relationship would we have with the EU. There are so many pluses and minuses to being in the EU, a lot to be sorted out there. Currency as well. I never understood what Osborne was doing, getting in the way of a combined currency, British power currency zone, probably because with the same argument that Britain had over keeping the pound and not wanting fiscal policy affected by Brussels. He was probably a bit concerned as to what Edinburgh might do for the pound if we basically had two centres of fiscal policy. But one final one before we let Hugh come in, being very aware of Denmark, I don't have any problem. Coming back to Scotland, the first thing you learn is you pay a little bit of an extra tax. There's the more complex tax banding and thresholds in Scotland, where variously you might pay, depending on where you are, a 1% supplement, a 2%, or even at the higher band, a 3% supplement. Now, Denmark, with 37% basic tax rate, and you can be up to 53%, is all very well saying, yeah, public finances are robust, but they're robust on a somewhat different approach to personal taxation than the British people as a whole are prepared to take. Scotland's already started to go some of the way there by realising that if you want public services at high quality, you got to pay for them somehow. And we've worked out what I think is a pretty reasonable wealth distribution approach in Scotland, but that would clearly have to be addressed. So huge number of questions here, and we do have to be careful at just taking a somewhat unresearched, unknowing look at Denmark. You really have to look at the overall big picture of how they've got to where they are, and would Scotland be prepared to take the same path, whether in the EU or out of it, because we have very different trading situation, what we're selling and where we're selling it to Denmark.
And Hugh, do you agree that high trade reliance, for example, Scotland exports oil, gas, water, renewable electricity, financial services, that makes up the bulk of those trading issues with England. International exports, actually, manufactured goods are higher with other trading partners for there. But do you agree that poses problems, or do you see something there that can be replicated?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at Denmark that they've got one of the most educated populations in the world. I think they've got the number of people with degrees in Denmark is amongst the highest in Europe. So the fact that educated economies are successful, it's you need to invest in people. Denmark, going back, it was a agricultural country, sort of lots of dairy, and obviously bacon, Danish bacon is famous for that. But they pivoted to more of industry and services. But they do have the benefit of being part of mainland Europe, and they've also got access into sort of Scandinavia, the Nordic countries, because obviously they've got the link to through to Sweden as well as to sort of Germany. But yeah, it just shows you, that I think 5.9 million population of Denmark off the top of my head. Similar to Scotland, 50, 60% bigger than population than Wales. It's remarkable, isn't it, how an independent country like that can prosper. Makes you wonder.
And do you think that being able to take decisions such as being in the single market, the EU single market, is a benefit that smaller countries can make? That, obviously this British Chamber of Commerce report has come out saying that centralised decisions have caused some issues. Do you think that kind of flexibility is helpful?
Oh, it's huge, isn't it? Because one of the things, you look at, sort of, again, going back to Labour and Reeves and the economy, that the economy isn't growing because, their whole sort of philosophy is based on we'll grow the economy, therefore we'll have more money to spend on things. But, because of the fiscal rules, she has to stick to that. The biggest impact on the economy has been Brexit. It has had, a multi-billion pound impact on the economy of the UK. And it's impacted places like Wales even more because of the funding that was coming from the EU, because we were a poor part of the of the European Union. But definitely, it's a no-brainer. And if you ask the majority of people now, we talk about people, 30% of Labour voters regretting it. The level of regret on Brexit, I think it's over. I think if there was a Brexit vote tomorrow, I think it would be well over 60% in favour of remaining against 40 against. And I'd imagine that 40% would be made up of many older reform voters who still think that that we have to be independent of Europe to close our borders and all that kind of nonsense. So you're not going to change their minds, unfortunately. But yeah, I think the good thing is the younger generation clearly see the future being different. In Wales, support for independence amongst people under 25 has never been higher. I think it's touching about 60%. So you can see the direction of travel, hopefully.
That's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who's donated and everyone who's signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month or more, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you, and thank you again to our guests, Hugh Marshall and Dr. Alan Flowers, and good to have you, and thank you indeed to all of you for watching today. Thanks very much.